A cold winter evening settled over the old forest cabin where 14-year-old Evan lived with his father. The snow had stopped falling an hour earlier, leaving the woods covered in a pale, unmoving blanket. The kind of quiet that arrived only after deep winter storms hung in the air, heavy and unusual. For someone like Evan, who spent his whole life around these trees, that silence meant something was off. He stepped outside to stack the last row of firewood before dark. The lantern in his hand swung gently, casting a small circle of light on the frozen ground. The only sound he expected to hear was the crunch of snow under his boots, nothing more. But then it happened. A deep, heavy thud came from the far edge of the yard. Not a branch falling. Not an animal brushing against the fence. This sound carried weight, like something large had dropped suddenly. Evan stopped, holding his breath without meaning to. The lantern flickered as he raised it higher, trying to see past the snow-covered bushes. His heartbeat quickened, but curiosity pushed him forward. As he approached the woodpile, the shape slowly came into view. At first, he thought it was a large bear, until he noticed the arms. The size, the broad chest. The thick fur that wasn't the right color for any animal he knew. Then he froze, lying half-collapsed. Against the woodpile was a massive creature, far taller than any man, with shoulders wide enough to fill a doorway. A Bigfoot. Its fur was dark, tangled, and streaked with blood. The creature's breathing was slow and uneven, each breath sounding like it took all the strength it had left. Evan couldn't move. His feet rooted to the snow as he stared, unable to process what he was seeing. The creature's massive frame trembled with pain. One arm twitched weakly before falling still again. Everything around him fell silent. The trees, the wind, even the distant forest birds. It felt as though the entire forest was holding its breath, watching the moment unfold, waiting to see what Evan would do next. Evan forced himself to take a slow breath as he stepped closer, the snow crunching softly under his feet. The lantern light spread across the creature's body, revealing details he had never imagined seeing in real life. The Bigfoot's fur, usually imagined as thick and powerful, was matted with patches of dried blood. Along its ribs, deep claw marks cut through the hair and skin, leaving long dark streaks. Its chest rose and fell in uneven intervals, each breath sounding like a struggle. One of its eyes opened halfway when Evan got within a few feet. The eye wasn't wild or angry, just tired. Tired in a way Evan had only seen once before, when his grandfather had fallen ill years ago. There was a quiet plea in that look, something that almost felt human. Evan swallowed hard, gripping the lantern a little tighter. Every instinct told him to run back to the cabin, to call for his father, to get inside where it was safe. But something stronger held him still, something simple, compassion. The creature tried to lift its head, but its strength gave out immediately. It let out a low, broken sound, more like a pained groan than anything threatening. Its arm twitched again, fingertips brushing helplessly against the snow. Evan crouched down, his breath forming white clouds in the cold air. From this close, he could see the creature shivering. Not from fear, just from cold and blood loss. He understood then, with sudden clarity. If he walked away now, this creature wouldn't survive the hour. The thought settled heavily in his chest as the forest around him remained silent. Waiting for the choice he would make, Evan took a careful step closer, his lantern trembling slightly in his hand. He studied the wound along the Bigfoot's ribs. The gash was long and deep, with ragged edges that made him wince. Blood had already begun to congeal on the fur, and every shallow breath the creature drew seemed to cause it more pain. Memories of his mother came to him. She had always said, "Pain is pain, no matter who feels it. If you can help, you must." Those words rang clearly in his mind, steady and insistent. The fear that had frozen him a moment ago began to melt, replaced by resolve. Evan moved quietly to the cabin and gathered what he could: a bucket of warm water, clean cloths, and an old blanket. Each step felt heavier than the last, but he refused to turn back. When he returned, the Bigfoot's eyes followed him. Its gaze, though tired and pained, held something unspoken, a flicker of trust. Slowly, Evan knelt beside the creature and placed the warm cloth on the wound. The Bigfoot flinched, but it did not pull away. Its large hand twitched slightly, as if testing whether he could be trusted. For a long moment, neither spoke. There was only the sound of the snow pressing against the cabin walls and the creature's labored breathing. Evan's hand hovered over its arm, uncertain at first, then finally rested there. The warmth of his small hand met the massive, trembling one of the creature. The trust in that simple contact was unmistakable. It did not speak. It did not roar. But in that quiet, Evan knew something important. This creature had allowed him to help. And that trust meant everything. Evan tried to lift the creature, but its size far exceeded anything he could manage alone. The Bigfoot's weight pressed down, and every movement caused it to groan softly, the sound echoing off the cabin walls. Panic nudged at the edges of his mind, but he forced it down. He could not leave it there. Just then, his father returned from checking the far edge of the property. The moment he saw the massive form slumped against the snow, his eyes widened in shock. But he did not scream or reach for a weapon. Instead, he studied the creature quietly, noting the slow rise and fall of its chest and the weak tremors in its limbs. "If it wanted to hurt us," his father said carefully, "it wouldn't be lying here like this, bleeding." Evan nodded, relief mingling with urgency. Together, father and son moved toward the creature. Step by step, they guided it upright, supporting its weight as best they could. The Bigfoot leaned heavily against them, groaning, but it did not resist. It seemed almost aware that help had come. Inside the cabin, the air was warmer. The fireplace crackled gently, casting a soft light across the room. Evan and his father carefully eased the Bigfoot down near the hearth. Its body shivered uncontrollably, and the heat seemed to soothe the tremors slightly. For a long moment, no one spoke. The fire's warmth mixed with the silence, creating a fragile calm. Outside, the forest seemed to pause, as if observing the fragile bond forming inside the small cabin. Evan knelt beside the creature, placing the blanket gently over its shoulders. Its eyes met his once more, wide and trusting. And for the first time since seeing it collapsed in the snow, Evan felt something like hope. He realized then, fully, that this night would change everything, not just for the Bigfoot, but for him, too. Evan knelt beside the Bigfoot, taking a deep, steadying breath. The creature's wound was long and jagged, running along its ribs, and the sight made his stomach tighten. Carefully, he dipped a cloth into the warm water he had brought and pressed it gently against the gash. The Bigfoot flinched at first but did not pull away. Its dark eyes remained fixed on Evan, watching him with a quiet, unreadable intensity. His father knelt nearby, holding a small bundle of needle and thread. He worked slowly and carefully, stitching the torn skin with precision. The Bigfoot let out soft, low sounds, not growls or threats, but pained murmurs that seemed almost grateful. Evan refilled the wooden bowl with water and offered it to the creature. It lifted its head with effort, bringing its lips to the bowl and drinking slowly, as if savoring each drop. Its chest rose and fell more evenly now, the tremors less violent in the warmth of the cabin. The firelight danced across the room, illuminating the lines of its massive face and the careful movements of Evan and his father. Each gesture mattered. Every gentle touch, every small effort to soothe the creature, carried weight. For a moment, the cabin seemed suspended in time. Outside, the forest was quiet. Inside, there was only the soft breathing of a creature that had suffered and the steady, careful hands of the boy and his father. Evan reached out and rested his hand lightly on the creature's arm. The Bigfoot did not move away. Instead, it let its enormous hand twitch toward his, an unspoken acknowledgement of trust. In that silent connection, both knew something important. Compassion could cross any boundary. Even between species, the night had begun in fear. But in the warmth of the cabin, it now held a fragile sense of hope. ****. Outside, the storm grew stronger, snow and wind pressing against the cabin walls. Inside, Evan stayed close to the Bigfoot, watching its chest rise and fall with uneven breaths. The creature murmured softly, at times low. Broken sounds that were neither threatening nor clear words, just pain, exhaustion, and perhaps confusion. Evan kept his hand resting lightly on its arm, offering warmth and reassurance. Each time the Bigfoot shivered, he adjusted the blanket over its shoulders, careful not to startle it. He could feel the tension in its muscles, the tremors that ran through its massive frame. Hours passed slowly. The cabin felt suspended in time, holding a fragile peace in the storm's chaos. At one point, the Bigfoot lifted a trembling arm toward Evan for a heartbeat. It hesitated, as if uncertain whether the boy could be trusted. Evan responded instinctively, gently placing his hand over the creature's. The contact brought a subtle change. The creature's breathing began to even out, the tremors lessening slightly. Evan felt the enormity of the moment, this silent communication. The trust extended without words, the unspoken bond forming between them. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, there was only quiet. The fire crackled softly, casting gentle shadows over the cabin and the two of them. For a long night, nothing else existed except the slow, steady rhythm of shared understanding, a boy and a wounded creature, connected by courage, care, and simple compassion. The first light of morning filtered through the frost-covered windows, soft and pale, painting the cabin in muted tones. Evan stirred, careful not to wake his father, and glanced at the Bigfoot. For the first time since the previous evening, the creature's eyes were fully open. Its chest still rose and fell with effort, but there was a steadier rhythm now, a hint of strength returning after the night of shivering and pain. The Bigfoot attempted to rise, pushing against the floor with enormous arms. Its movements were clumsy and slow, each shift of weight seeming to demand every ounce of its remaining energy. Evan stepped forward gently, placing a hand on its arm. "It's okay," he murmured, guiding it back down to sit. There was no fear in his voice, only calm reassurance. The creature studied its surroundings. Its gaze lingered on the warm glow of the fire, the rough wooden walls, and the small items scattered across the cabin. There was no aggression, no wariness, just alert curiosity and cautious calm. Evan moved to the table and brought a bowl of warm broth. He set it on the floor near the creature, who lowered its head to drink slowly, savoring each sip. The way it moved, careful and deliberate, carried a quiet dignity despite its weakened state. Then, almost imperceptibly, the Bigfoot tapped its chest twice. Evan paused, understanding the gesture. Gratitude, respect, connection. His father, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped closer. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Both understood the significance. This was not a creature of mindless violence. It was intelligent, aware, and capable of recognizing kindness. For a moment, the cabin was still. Outside, the wind had softened. Inside, a fragile, tentative hope filled the room. Evan watched the creature drink, breathe, and regain some measure of strength, realizing that last night's terror had transformed into something entirely different. Trust. The morning light revealed not just a recovering creature, but the beginning of a bond that neither human nor Bigfoot had expected. As the morning wore on, the Bigfoot began to shift in subtle ways, communicating through gestures rather than sound. Its massive hands moved slowly through the air, tracing lines and motions that seemed almost deliberate. Evan and his father watched closely, trying to understand. The creature mimicked clawing motions, jerking its arm as if showing the source of its injury. Then it pointed deeper into the forest, toward the trees beyond the cabin. The meaning was clear. Whatever had attacked it still lingered out there. The forest was dangerous, but it had survived long enough to reach safety here. Evan exchanged a look with his father. They did not need words to recognize the implication. This was no random attack. The Bigfoot had been hunted or wounded in the wild alone, and it had made its way to them purely out of necessity. The creature was a victim, not a predator. Carefully, Evan approached, his hand hovering over the creature's arm. The Bigfoot did not flinch. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, acknowledging his presence. Evan gently pressed a cloth to the wound again, wiping away a little more dried blood. Its massive shoulders relaxed just enough to show that it trusted him. The quiet in the cabin was profound. The storm outside had softened to a low wind, and the fire crackled softly in the hearth. There was no hurry, no fear, only a slow understanding forming between human and creature. For the first time, Evan felt like he could read the Bigfoot's emotions clearly. Exhaustion, pain, and a cautious relief that it had found help. His father, watching silently, nodded once. He understood that they were witnessing something rare, something delicate and fragile. The Bigfoot's dark eyes met Evan's again, steady and intelligent. There was no need for words. The message was unmistakable. It had come here for help, and it had found it. In that silent, shared understanding, Evan realized how fragile and precious trust could be, and how much courage it took for a creature so powerful to allow itself to be vulnerable. For a long moment, the cabin existed in this quiet balance, a space suspended between danger and safety, pain and care. As evening approached, the soft light of dusk filtered through the cabin windows, turning the room a muted orange. Evan sat quietly beside the Bigfoot, who had grown noticeably stronger over the day. Its breathing was steadier, and its movements, though still slow, were deliberate and measured. For the first time, the boy felt that the creature might truly recover. Then, from outside, soft, deliberate footsteps reached the cabin. Evan's heart quickened. He approached the door cautiously, holding the lantern high. At the tree line, two more Bigfoots stood, tall and broad-shouldered, their dark eyes fixed on the cabin. Unlike the first, they were uninjured, and yet there was no aggression in their stance. The two creatures moved closer, stepping slowly, making low, gentle calls that carried through the cold air. Their calls were strange and deep, yet Evan sensed they were not threatening. The injured Bigfoot lifted its head weakly, responding with a quiet, rumbling sound. There was recognition, relief, and reassurance in that exchange. Evan and his father watched silently. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, aware that something extraordinary was happening. The two visitors did not enter the cabin, but stood at the threshold, observing. Their eyes, intelligent and cautious, met the injured creature's gaze. Slowly, the injured Bigfoot struggled to its feet, leaning slightly on Evan's shoulder for balance. It moved toward the doorway, steadying itself with careful steps. Outside, the three creatures met in a quiet reunion. Their gestures were simple but meaningful, a touch here, a nudge there, soft calls exchanged that carried weight far beyond sound. The injured Bigfoot's trust in Evan was evident even now. It did not turn abruptly or act hastily. Evan lowered the lantern slightly, understanding the moment was theirs alone. The forest around the cabin seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet, deliberate bond between the creatures and the boy who had chosen compassion over fear. For Evan and his father, the moment was humbling. In that silent meeting, they witnessed not chaos or danger, but care, loyalty, and an intelligence that transcended species. It was a reunion born of need, trust, and the quiet courage of a wounded being seeking help and finding it in the most unexpected place. The injured Bigfoot now stood more steadily, supported gently by the other two creatures. Evan watched quietly, holding the lantern low so as not to startle them. Outside, the last light of day softened into evening. and the forest seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that something extraordinary was unfolding. Before leaving, the injured creature turned slowly toward Evan. It lowered its massive head in a gesture that spoke of respect and gratitude, simple and profound. There was no roar, no sign of aggression, only acknowledgement. Evan felt a lump form in his throat. His father, standing beside him, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, silent but fully aware of the weight of the moment. Then, the Bigfoot reached down carefully and placed a small carved wooden token into Evan's hand. Its shape was simple, a forest symbol, but it carried meaning that neither words nor speech could convey. Evan held it tightly, tears forming in his eyes. Feeling the enormity of the trust and connection between them, the three creatures then turned together and moved silently into the woods, disappearing between the trees. The forest was quiet again, the storm long gone, leaving only the stillness of a winter night. Evan stood for a long time, staring at the empty tree line. He understood that what had happened would remain with him forever. He had witnessed trust, courage, and kindness crossing boundaries no one expected. Sometimes, he thought, moments do not need words. Sometimes, compassion speaks louder than anything else. In that silence, he felt the truth of what had unfolded. A boy had chosen to help. A creature had accepted, and for a brief moment, two very different worlds had connected. The forest returned to its quiet rhythm. But inside Evan, a sense of awe and peace lingered, a reminder that even in the wildest places, understanding and love could be found.